Welcome to Reignite, a podcast that's usually about Mass Effect, but today we're doing something bloodier. I'm MJ.
And I'm Matt, aka Stormageddon.
And we're at Dark Side of the Con 3, hosted by Vampire Freaks, to talk about vampires in video games.
Thanks everybody for coming. We appreciate it.
Woo! Yay! So, I play like 3 video games over and over again, and none of them have anything to do with vampires. Matt, this is your realm of expertise. I'm going to need your help here.
Yeah, so my experience with vampires in video games goes back way far to the Nintendo days. I'm sure everyone here is familiar with Castlevania, the classic. But I think my love of vampire games came into being with the PlayStation generation and PlayStation 2. So like Blood Omen and Blood Rain, and there's a lot of blood in the titles of games with vampires, I'm realizing. Castlevania Symphony of the Night, those kinds of things. Typically on Reignite, what we do is talk about story choices and divergent choices in games. We normally talk about Mass Effect. The reason the main focus of today is going to be about Dawnguard is because Skyrim has a lot of choices. But I think my earliest memory is playing Castlevania 1 on the NES and dying a lot. As far as video games with vampires. Does anyone here in the room have any favorite vampire video games?
One that's coming out soon.
Bloodlines 2.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's actually a good point, and I forgot to bring that up. So Vampire the Masquerade, a very famous tabletop vampire game, had a very famous video game in the 90s? Was that the 90s that the first one came out? That's called Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, where you picked a clan, you role-played, you did missions, and like it was very interactive, a la the kind of stuff we have now more commonly. And they just announced a month ago, not even, that they're finally making a sequel to the game. And it's the same developers, right? Yeah. So that's actually really exciting and kind of made us relevant by accident, which I happily accept. And yeah, Bloodlines was one of those games where like it really dove, one of those words.
Delved is a good word.
Delved is a good word?
Yeah.
Into a ton of lore about the different clans and like how you interact with humans and keeping up the masquerade, which is a big part about being a vampire. Is like you don't want people to know you're a vampire because then they'll be onto your shit and you can't feed, or that's part of it at least. And so I love that game because it really allowed you to role play, get a sense of the culture, what it was like to be a vampire in that world. Unless you were a Malkavian, then you were just crazy and did whatever you wanted anyway. One laugh, I'll take it. And so I think that what's interesting about vampires' representation about video games, is that it's not really consistent to itself. It's consistent to its own housed lore. I found that, while Blood Rain might be about a half vampire fighting Nazis, and then Blood Omen is about, the devil and the oldest vampire fighting forever for the souls of mankind, they all kind of keep to their own rules, but don't necessarily apply to the rules of other games. Which is why I've always found vampirism in gaming really fascinating. Also, it's kind of a built-in mechanic system, like blood points, health points, magic. All of that stuff really feeds together really well in vampires and video games because a lot of the occult mixes with a lot of the old school fantasy-based spellcasting style and lore-based games as well. And so it was kind of a natural modern evolution. It was the first time we saw a lot of really cool goth and occult stuff in gaming when we leaned into vampire-based video games. Anything to add?
I mean, you kind of steamrolled over all my questions, so.
Sorry.
I realize why I don't like being on the same side of the table as you, because you move your hands a lot towards my face.
Sorry.
And that's why I had to put your hand down before, because you had the pen and it was very close to my eyes. And
I'll sit on my hands for the rest of today.
Yeah, you might have to.
Well, actually, one question I'd like to ask that's written on the paper in front of me.
You're welcome.
Is what kind of games with vampires that you guys don't really see right now that you'd be interested in seeing? Like vampires as the hero, vampires as the villain, something completely different. Anybody?
I mean, just the vampires, werewolves, they've been fighting for a long time.
Yeah.
And
Ooh.
Like, you're straight up a vampire. You could be a little bit of both.
So just to repeat, we're looking for a little more diversity and blending of tropes and genres. So that would be really cool to get away from the war, so
Yeah.
to speak, and just look at a completely new world where there's peace. Yes?
Actually, I would actually like to see video games where vampires are the hero, because more often than not in video games or in books or in movies, vampires are just always coded as the bad guy.
Yeah.
And because they're big, they're scary, they're monsters, they feast on human beings. So we have been trained from the inception of vampires to think of them as just evil. And I would like to see that sort of overturned.
That's a good point. One of the most compelling things about the Castlevania anime on Netflix, which you haven't seen, I highly recommend, is it humanizes Dracula before it turns him into a complete asshole, and like shows you that these creatures, these beings, are people before they lose their humanity, and even after they still have some, and sometimes it's the humans that make it worse.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that in video games there's a lot more animosity towards vampires, when in other pop culture, vampires are humanized so much more frequently.
Yeah.
Like we have young teen romance where vampires are often the romantic heroes.
And sparkly.
So we should
That's
have
not-
some video games where vampires are a romancing option.
Right. It would be nice to romance a vampire. I didn't get to in Dawnguard.
Me neither.
So,
I wanted to.
I
but-
wanted to real bad.
Yeah, Caitlin.
I actually think it would be a really great exercise to see empire building simulators
Ooh.
around vampires.
Sort of like a resource manager, or kind of like even like a or RTS, where you're kind of creating a clan of vampires.
Oh no, even simpler. Think Crusader Kings 2.
Oh, okay.
Vampires.
Yeah,
I don't know what any of those words meant.
that's fine.
Okay.
No, that's actually a really cool idea. We'll get into it more when we talk about Skyrim and Dawnguard. And they kind of, after you finish, if you finish the vampire path, which we'll get to more in a bit, you get the ability to kind of build your clan, but it's very, here's a mission, go do a thing, and that's it. There's no real management of the clan. And I think that would be really interesting to kind of build that, have the social interaction that goes with it, the unrest management, all of that stuff. Yeah, that's a really cool idea. Anyway.
Yes.
One game that I think that came out was a little bit of a letdown. I don't know if anyone remembers the PS4 Vampire with the Y.
Yeah.
Oh, yes,
You
I
heard
do.
about that.
Yes.
I think it was interesting how it was showing the perspective of a person trying to go through that transformation without hurting everyone around them.
Yeah.
I was a little disappointed in the fact that you can basically get through the game without actually hurting other people if you're really careful enough. I don't think that's realistic enough.
Right.
So I think they could have gone with that in a, I don't want to say a more realistic direction, because vampires, but
More believable.
yeah, more believable in socio, sort of political terms, I guess.
Yeah, I'd heard about that game. The creators, Dawnguard, I believe it's Dawnguard, they made, what's the other game? They made a bunch of narrative games that were really great, and so I was excited to play that and never got around to it. But I'm bummed to hear that it goes that right.
It's not bad. It's pretty good. It's just
Not,
It's not the
I
best
have
it could
high
be.
Expectations.
that's fair. Yeah, that's totally fair.
Walk in with zero expectations. That's how I live my life.
Like it.
Yes.
So like I just heard about that White Wolf announcement too, and then I started looking up research in the world, because I never finished Bloodlines.
Right.
And there was this guy that got hired by White Wolf to just take on a persona and just talk to you about clans and everything. And he was saying, he was describing the blood of a human as to wine, but I mean vampires could sort of feed on wildlife too, but
Right.
I would imagine that would be like shitty soda.
Yeah, probably. I know that a lot of material, both in gaming and outside of it, has dealt with that, like vampires feeding on rats and that kind of thing. And I think you can feed on some of the animals in Skyrim. I don't remember. I didn't try. But like there's some diversity to it. But that's another thing. You bring up vampire. Skyrim doesn't really do a lot of that. Like it's still game mechanic bound for a lot of being a vampire, which is kind of a bummer. Yes, John.
To the specific point you were just saying, when you're playing as a vampire lord and you're trying to like absorb souls so that you can up your skill tree, human beings are obviously the easiest one to do that, but mud crabs and frost spiders also give you points to be able to level that up.
But probably less because they're wildlife.
It's actually a one in one level.
Huh.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, I didn't know that.
Just those two things though, like bears don't do it, trolls don't do it, just frost spiders and mud crabs for some reason.
Now you know for when you never go back to it.
When I will never do it again. It was terrible.
It was very frustrating.
All right, shall we chat about Skyrim? So who here has played Skyrim? All right, good. A fair amount of folks.
He asks me a question, and then he does not wait for me to respond. You
you're-
all saw that.
And they heard it. Would you like to answer the question?
I was going to ask you, for people who don't really know a lot about vampires in video games, where do you suggest that they begin?
Oh,
I have insightful shit.
so, okay, well, let's ask, who here has not played a video game with vampires in it?
Well, there was Sims Nightlife. I don't know if that counts.
Okay, I mean, that's fair.
We got a couple.
We do have a few, but everyone here has played video games to some degree? Okay, so, I mean, depending on the games you like, it's really hard to pick a starting point. My go-to is Castlevania Symphony of the Night.
Let's say one that's fueled by story and one that's fueled by mechanics, so like fighting and stuff like that.
Okay. So Symphony of the Night's a good in-between. It was a PlayStation game. It was a side-scrolling Castlevania game like the previous ones, but it had better graphics and voice acting, questionable voice acting, but voice acting, a really great soundtrack, and it's about Alucard, the son of Dracula, going to kill Dracula. The mechanics are really fun. If you like side-scrolling action platformers, I would highly recommend it. What?
Alucard?
Yeah, that's his name.
Alucard.
Yes, it's Dracula backwards. They've used it in many properties. What's your point?
I'm just saying.
It's not. It's a trope in vampire anything, really.
I'm not saying nothing, but I'm just saying.
If you wanted to do something more story-driven, it'd be tough. I would recommend Bloodlines. Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. It's a PC game. I think it just recently got, not a re-release, but like a lot of sites are featuring it. Because that one's really story-driven. You really get into the nitty-gritty of what it's like to be a vampire, which is, if you're fascinated with the lore, is really cool. And then like the go-between kind of hacky, slashy, cheesy kind of vampire game, I'd recommend either Blood Rain or Blood Omen, because they're both ridiculous. Blood Rain, you are a sexy, female-presenting vampire in leather killing Nazi vampires. So like as far as tropes go, it checks all the boxes.
My dad was a fan. Surprising no one.
Shocking. So
Killing
yeah.
Nazis. Hot character.
I mean, killing Nazis is always fun, right? We're all in agreement of that, right? Like, kill Nazis. Yeah, okay, good. Just making sure.
I don't care for these new Nazis, and you may quote me on that.
Yeah, I will. It's on record.
Okay, so now I think we're ready to talk about Dawnguard. So we've established everybody knows about Skyrim.
Even if you haven't played it, you're familiar with the game Skyrim and its storytelling. Fantasy game. You can do almost anything in.
You really can.
Very overwhelming.
It's a lot of freedom.
Yeah, you can build your own house. You can make your own weapons. You can romance people. You can.
My house has a 3-floor library.
Of course it does. I didn't build a house this time.
So we chose to do the Dawnguard section, which is all about vampires. It's about hunting them, possibly becoming them, trying to create a better world with or without them. I played an orc named Ren that went the rogue path. She became the head of the Thieves Guild before starting the Dawnguard adventure.
I played a Nord, which is kind of like, think Thor's kind of people, like blonde hair, blue eye, white dudes.
Lame.
Named Stormageddon, duh. And I went down the warrior's path because I like hitting things with giant hammers. Really simple pleasures. And I didn't really do any of the major branching story stuff that I didn't have to before engaging in Dawnguard because I didn't have the wherewithal.
I wanted to have a nice level set up. Like, I wanted to have all the skills that I needed. I wanted to fill out the trees that I liked. So
I mean, the great thing about
good.
Skyrim is if you use your hammer, you get points to make your hammer better. So the more you smash stuff, the better you become at it. It was really easy.
I sneak up on people and stab them.
Yes, that's more your style. And so we also chose different paths as well because Dawnguard So the Dawnguard are vampire hunters. They are, and the DLC revolves around them and anything associated to them.
Yep. So I chose to hunt the vampires and stay firmly on the side of the Dawnguard.
And so you stayed human as well.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, orc.
Right. You stayed humanoid.
Well,
Living. Not undead.
all of your words are just wrong.
And I decided to choose the path of the vampire. Very early in the Dawnguard DLC, you get the Dawnguard has you investigate what they think is vampire activity, and it brings you to the vampires that are taking over Skyrim.
Are you gonna step all over my fancy summary that I wrote out?
Fine.
Skyrim, for those unfamiliar, is an open-world RPG where you can build a character who will then become the Dragonborn, a legendary hero. But until then, you can do hundreds of other things while you avoid the main story plot, which we often do.
Yeah, it's true.
Such as join a group of vampire hunters called the Dawnguard. From there, you can devote yourself to the cause or become the very thing you promised to destroy.
Like I did.
This one. Either way, you team up with a vampire named Serana to keep the world safe from a terrible prophecy.
Yeah, I kept wanting to call her Serena.
Yeah.
Because it's spelled Serena.
No, it's spelled Serana.
Is it? It just, yeah.
Your old man eyes just read Serena.
Aha, I see. So I chose the path of becoming a vampire, which I have a lot to bitch about mechanically in the game, but we'll get to that.
Yeah. So you first learn about Dawnguard. Somebody approaches you after a vampire attack in Riften and tells you, I'm getting a group of people together. We're going to go hunt vampires. They're becoming an increasing threat. We could use people like you. I don't know why they specifically target us, because we just kind of stood back and was like, oh, hey, that's a vampire attack. Yep, that's what that's about.
I mean, to be fair, I'm walking around in full plate armor with a giant hammer, so, they might think I'd be useful. I'm guessing.
That's fair
Shows
for
what
you.
they know.
Yeah. Instead, you betrayed your people.
Everybody let go of my humanity immediately.
It worked out for me because I was on my Thieves Guild grind, so I was already in Riften. So it worked out for me. When you first approach Dawnguard, you run into this dude named Agmar, and he's so hype. He's like, I'm going to be a vampire hunter. Everything's going to be amazing. I'm also really scared. Will you go with me?
Literally, you're walking to the Dawnguard's home base when he approaches you, and he's running beside you, and he's like a hyperactive child who then the mortality of his entire life and everything in front of him strikes him at once. It's very funny.
We meet Isran, who is the guy who is running Dawnguard, and I don't super like him.
He's kind of a dick.
He hates vampires, which, okay, fair. If they've killed everything that you loved, I get it. Vampires are wiped out this clan called the Vigilants, who he used to serve. And then he kept telling everyone, the vampires are going to come, they're going to destroy everything. Why doesn't anybody listen to me? And he got thrown out of his previous organization. They all got slaughtered. He said, I knew it!
Told you so.
And then he started his own organization called the Dawnguard. I don't like him because he's often very much, I hate that which I cannot understand.
Is he white? I don't remember.
He's not. He's a man of
'cause
color.
I know.
Which also, referring back to Captain Dadderson, I think it's very interesting that in a lot of vampires, there are strong men of color who become your mentor.
Yeah, that's true.
It's interesting. I wonder if there's a trope about that.
Yeah, at this point in my playthrough, this is more or less the last time I see any of these people. Because after that, you go off to do your first mission as a vampire hunter, and you can either kill everything or do what I did and go meet their boss.
Yep. You go to Dim Hollow Crypt, where you find out what the vampires were after. The vampires were actually after a person who was locked in a crypt. That person had an Elder Scroll. Serana, who I thought I was going to fight immediately, was just like, hey, do you want to escort me home? And I don't know why, but your character just goes,
Sure. I'm along for the ride. I'll give it a shot.
So as you go, I have this realization. Dawnguard brings out the strong Gothic in Skyrim. There's a lot of Gothic elements in Skyrim overall, but in Dawnguard you really see it. There are gargoyles everywhere. And when you walk by them the first time, it's like, oh, hey, that's creepy. You walk by them the second time, they burst to life and try to kill you.
Yeah.
It's the worst, and I hate them.
You don't like being surprised?
Oh. They heal, I think, as you fight them.
Maybe, I don't know.
I don't remember, but they are not nice. They are difficult to fight. Serana's really cool. She's not an escort. She's a companion. Mm-hmm. So she fights as well. And she is very funny.
Yeah.
I think she's really interesting.
She's very sarcastic. She does play into some of the goth vampire tropes, like monotone voice, very sarcastic, dark makeup, the whole nine. But the voice
Daddy issues.
Daddy issues. The voice actor playing her, though, whose name escapes me, because of course it does a really good job. There are a lot of voice actors who have done work for Skyrim that, because they had to do literally hundreds of characters, they don't really change their voice and they just do the lines. But because Serana is a specialty character and I don't think her voice is used anywhere else, she's very expressive, very interesting, and a fun companion to have around.
Yeah. You take her back to her home where you discover the oldest vampires in Skyrim, who are very different from the vampires you've encountered up until this point. They present as human or Nord. They are very high class and elegant and noble born, so there's this kind of vampire elitism going on. Any vampires you've encountered to this point are facially different. They have pointed ears, they have an alteration to their face.
Think mostly
tell.
like Nosferatu kind of looking.
Yeah.
A lot of them hairless, kind of
in Buffy when the vampires become vampires.
Yeah.
There's a change.
And that does exist in this game, though it's very different.
Yes.
And when you are introduced to Lord Harkin, who is Serana's father,
Fuck that guy.
He's very thankful that you bring his daughter back. And then at that point, he asks you, you could become one of us. And there are different optional responses, but essentially I just went, sure, why not?
My favorite thing that he said to me was, men will tremble at your approach, which if I were just in my regular everyday life, I'd be like, you got something there. That is a little tempting, I'm not gonna lie. But because we made our decision that Matt would pursue vampires and I would hunt them, I said no.
And I accepted. And
I said no to immortality.
I didn't. It wasn't as great as I thought it would be, which is, I think, how that goes most of the time.
Yeah, there's more of body horror for the older vampires. You became a vampire lord.
Right, and so what happens in Skyrim mechanically, if you make that choice, is Harkin turns you, and then you're taken to a stable where there's a training sequence where they teach you to use all the widgets that the game allows you to do, which is a vampire lord form. You transform into essentially a giant man bat. If anyone's familiar with the Batman comics and what man bat looks like, it's very similar to that. And you can either kill people with your claws or cast spells and siphon people's life. And this shit sucks. And here's why. So for whatever reason, Skyrim, again, we said earlier, is a game where you can do almost anything. You can loot everything. You can grab items. There are a lot of quest items and other things to discover. When you are in your Vampire Lord form, you can interact with puzzles and open doors, but you cannot loot chests or bodies. At all. At all. While you're in the form.
Well, you don't have any pockets.
Really? And so mechanically, this made the game really annoying. It got to the point where I wasn't even bothering to loot anymore. I was just playing through the story to get through it so we could do this podcast, and I was very aggravated. Also, another problem is most of the spells and abilities are either too weak, too strong, or useless. And as you level up the tree, you can only level up your Vampire Lord skill tree when you are a Vampire Lord. So if you shift out of Vampire Lord form to loot something and then get attacked and kill something, it doesn't go towards your progress, which is also useless. It made playing a lot of the story stuff very frustrating. You can't fit through most doors. You can't talk to certain NPCs. It was just aggravating. And so I immediately regretted my decision, but saw it through. But after you get changed, then this is where the story diverges. You, as a vampire, get Lord Harkin's plan to want to blot out the sun forever, essentially. And you have to help him get the rest of the Elder Scrolls like his daughter has. And you go on a quest to do that. And there is some overlap later on down the line in getting the scrolls, but for the next hour or so of the DLC, it diverges.
Right. So I was banished and sent back to shore, safe and sound, never to see my friend Serana ever again.
Not true. Lies.
I didn't know that at the time. I just thought she was gone forever, and it was very heartbreaking.
You were very sad.
So I returned home to a vampire attack because on my way home I thought, it's very weird that he just returned me to shore because now I know where their headquarters are.
It is very
I have,
dumb.
like an army of people with crossbows and I can just bring them here. Okay, but I returned home to a vampire attack. That's when Isran decided we need more allies, which surprising from this guy because he doesn't seem like he makes friends at all. So Isran sends me after some people. So did you have to do...
So my recruitment was different. The mission that you get as a vampire is you need to prove your devotion to the
cause.
The cause, essentially. And so you have to fill a magic chalice with special blood, bring it back to Lord Harkin. It's a whole lot of nonsense. But you do that, and of course, when you go to do that, you're also other vampires who want to be at the top of the totem pole. They attack you, and you have to kill them, and blah, blah, blah. So you bring the chalice back, give it to Lord Harkin, he drinks from it, you drink from it, you're bonded, blah, blah, blah.
Gay.
It's funny, the ceremony in which you drink from the chalice is very, I don't know if it's intentionally queer, but is definitely very queer, which is fine by me. But I couldn't tell how sincere that was or not. Because there's a lot of...
Did you romance Lord Harkin? Is that what happened?
No. Well, because there's a lot of sexuality involved in vampire lore. Right. And so I wouldn't be surprised by it, but Skyrim doesn't seem like the kind of game to focus on that. So it was just very strange.
Yeah. For me... Serana came looking for me, and Isran was very angry that there was a vampire willingly at Fort Dawnguard trying to make an argument for why she shouldn't be murdered right there on the spot. And he says something that made me, really not like him. Set my hatred aside? Not a chance. It's what keeps me strong. Dang, dude.
Yeah.
Calm down.
He doesn't know it's just a game. They don't know. They're not aware.
But still, that's such a scary mentality.
Oh, of course it is.
Hatred is what keeps you going. Ugh. I don't want that guy to be my, mentor figure. Oh,
another thing that starts happening after you become a vampire is members of the Dawnguard, mooks, I guess, footmen, just appear out of nowhere.
Well, yeah.
When you zone into areas, but they don't run to you. They're literally just there. So to get to the castle where the vampires is, you have to take a lone boat to a shore elsewhere. When you get there, they're in the tallest tower right outside the castle, waiting for you. How did they get there? How did they find it? So that always was a little bizarre.
Very resourceful.
Yeah, I took them down pretty easily.
There were a lot of fetch quests after that, recruiting people, finding a moth priest. Did Serana ever come to you?
So Serana was with me the whole time, and eventually tells me that she doesn't trust her dad. We also have to get
why.
You have to get a moth priest. So the Elder Scrolls in Skyrim are like these highly religious and magical tomes that only special priests can read. And as we find out, when you get that priest, in their haste, they go blind if they're not careful when they read them.
Yep.
And so it leads to more fetch quests. You have to get the other Elder Scrolls as well. I believe both story paths lead you to Serana's mom, who's trapped in Skyrim's version of the Underworld, which is really cool looking.
It's called the Soul Cairn.
Soul Cairn?
Cairn. Cairn. It's basically what the inside of a soul gem looks like.
Oh, I never thought of that. But that makes sense.
It's also explained to you.
I wasn't paying attention.
Of course not.
Details? Who needs details?
Me. I thrive on them.
That's true.
So,
I don't think... So what's interesting, now that we're talking about it, is I don't think there's a ton of... So Reignite is a podcast. We talk a lot about diverging choices and different story choices, although our morality tends to align, so we tend to make similar choices.
Yeah.
We forced ourselves to make separate choices here.
Because you were a vampire, you were able to go straight into the soul cairn without any problem. I had to either become a vampire or soul trap myself in order to go in.
Huh, interesting. Yeah, I just had to sneak into Serana's mom's lab, find ingredients, literally do a cooking mini game.
Yep.
Boom, portal.
There were a lot of puzzles that were really frustrating. There's a part where you have to try and get one of those Elder Scrolls, and there's a light puzzle where you have to press the right button so the lights shine on the right things,
Uh-huh.
and I had to look it up because I could not figure it out for the life of me.
So I had to do that puzzle too. To get one of the Elder Scrolls, I had to do that.
Right.
But I just looked it up to begin with because I've played Skyrim before. I know what a pain in the ass that puzzle was, and I wasn't having it after, having to start several missions over again because I couldn't heal myself as a vampire lord because you can't use potions. Fuck.
Did you also have to talk to the tentacled mass?
No.
There's a god. What was the name of the god?
Hermaeus Mora.
That one, Hermaeus Mora, who talks to you as you're leaving that ice cave where you got all the puzzle pieces to begin with, and he pitches to you, hey, if you get me the blood of these 3 things, I will give you untold knowledge. And I just wanted to be like, no. I'm busy. Go away.
Yeah, I didn't get that because I think if you're already a vampire, he won't appear to you.
That's
I think
interesting.
it's only if you're mortal. Oh, he does? Oh, you got it? Then maybe I just didn't pursue the quest beyond what I absolutely had to do.
Unavoidable, so I don't know how you got it.
I avoided it.
It appears
So
in the doorway.
It's clearly not unavoidable because I avoided it.
I think you just forgot.
No, I didn't forget. If there's a will or a way to avoid shit in Skyrim, I will find it.
Did you encounter any feral vampires?
Yes. Vampires are still attacking you as a vampire, which is like the vampire crime seems also pretty legit in a lot of vampire lore. Literally, a lot of the factions feud a lot. And so for me, I think it made sense for that in Skyrim, but also I was like, bro, I'm one of you.
I think the concept of feral vampires are very interesting. We see it a lot in vampire media. Being Human had a concept with it. Vampires that are turned the wrong way, they'll become feral and disfigured and won't fit in with society.
Right.
We see it in the Choose Your Own Adventure vampire story that I was playing. There were ferals in that. But it's common. It's a vampire that is not really fully vampire.
Yeah, obviously they exist in Skyrim on a meta level, so you have stuff to hit with your weapon. Duh. But I wish there were more opportunities as a vampire to, negotiate because I was one of them. Mm-hmm. But that didn't really happen. A lot of them were like, oh, you're a half-breed, you suck, you're trash. And I was like, Judgy, come on.
Because you're not one of... It's vampire elitism.
It is. I'm not a pure blood.
Going forward, we finally figure out what we have to do in order to either help Harkin with his plan,
Right.
or stop Harkin from destroying the sun.
Yeah, so this is the interesting thing, is even if you're a vampire, after you meet Serana's mom, who's trapped in Skyrim's version of the underworld because she double-crossed him and then ran away, it's convoluted, Serana begs you to not help her father. And so I didn't help him either.
Okay.
But my path is still different than yours. Because do we want to get into the end of the stuff bullshit?
Yeah, I guess.
So the final mission is you either fight or help Lord Harkin. I decided because his views...
You skipped over something.
What did I skip over?
Getting Oriel's bow.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I hated this section. It was an endless fetch quest. You have to fill these vases with water and then carry them to another vase and fill that vase with water and then carry it to another vase. It was just pointless.
Yeah.
Because you're traveling all over this snowy glen trying to get all these things, but you're learning about the snow elves, which is interesting.
Right, and they're not really featured in the game much besides there. What sucks about Oriel's bow is there are no weapon-like items that can't be used as weapons in Skyrim. If it's a magical weapon, it's usually used for something. It's not just a pretty thing you need for a quest, in other games. And so the problem is, when you're a vampire lord, you cannot use weapons. You need Oriel's bow to kill Lord Harkin.
So you can't do it as a vampire?
Sort of. We'll get to that.
Okay.
The good thing about the Vampire Lord form in Skyrim and these kind of MacGuffins in Skyrim is that you can change back and forth between them pretty easily, but it still takes some hoops to jump through. And so it wasn't impossible, but it made things more complicated.
I hated the Harkin fight. The Harkin fight gave me the hardest time. He would disappear. He would heal. He would dart across the room. I wouldn't be able to catch him to hit him with the bow.
Yeah, so the way the fight goes is he becomes a vampire lord, you fight him, and he has phases, and in between each phase, he, like, shoots to the center of a room surrounded by blood in an orb, ominous, and you have to shoot him with the bow to stop him, and then it shifts to the next phase. So for me, as a vampire lord, I would turn into a vampire, fight him. He would do that. I would change back. I would equip the bow. I would shoot it at him. He would stop doing the thing. I would change back to a vampire lord because I'm stronger, start attacking him again, and then rinse and repeat.
I kind of hope that you would go the help Harkin route, so we would have very different things to talk about.
Again, similar moral compass. Well, but it's still different because when you kill Harkin as a vampire, you become the new vampire lord of the castle. Which then immediately, literally minutes after I killed Harkin, one of his lackeys comes to me and goes, "Great job! You're promoted. Go find other vampires. Or go kill this Dawnguard person." I was like, really, dude? I've been in power for literally minutes.
Well, that's what they always do. Whenever you're coming up in an organization, the goal is to become the leader of that organization. It happened in the Thieves Guild. It happened in the Dark Brotherhood. Happens in the Companions.
Fucking no one can do anything for themselves in Skyrim. Dudes, be independent.
Well, that's why you're the Dragonborn. You're supposed to be the leader of the people.
I get it. I'm the guy. Fine. But yeah, I had played Dawnguard before we decided to do it for this panel, but I hadn't played it in a while, and I forgot how little choice there was.
Yeah.
Like, or more accurately in Skyrim, a lot of the choices are superficial, which is a bummer. I think that, you know, like, the reason we both love Mass Effect and we do a podcast about it is all of the choices affect other choices down the line. Whereas in Skyrim, they affect each other, but mostly just in the way the narrative is thrown at you, not necessarily how you interact with characters, who you love.
Like, you can choose what side to be on. You can choose where to stand in the Civil War. You can choose, do you take out the Dark Brotherhood or do you join the Dark Brotherhood?
Right.
Like, it's not a choice that ultimately affects the end of the story.
No.
Whereas in Mass Effect, we get these choices where if this character dies in game 1, they're not going to be there in game 2, and someone else has to step in, and that person is completely different.
Yeah.
It's not just a substitution. It is a completely different story.
Yeah, my greatest disappointment with Skyrim is that I'm at a point in gaming, and I'm curious if anyone else feels this way, where open worlds overwhelm me. Like, I like a list of quests to do because I have like a trajectory, because I also am thinking about 3 other games I want to play. Whereas when I open up Skyrim or a game like it, I see that I have 30 quests and 4 skills to level up, and, you know, pieces of armor to build and a house to make and, you know, whatever else. And I just go, there's a lot of stuff to do. I don't want to do any of it. And then I turn it off. Does anyone else feel overwhelmed by open world games?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, there are a bunch of hands. Yeah, I think that, like, there's nothing wrong with options, but I think the reason I play a lot of indie games actually lately, and there's actually a really great vampire-related indie game by the creator of Symphony of the Night called Bloodstained that's coming out. That's a side-scrolling action game, and that's more exciting to me because I go from point A to point Z with some stops and awesome story along the way, but I don't also have to build a house, make a suit of armor, make my weapon, go buy herbs so I can make potions, and then actually do the quests.
So, what did you play on? Did you play on PC?
Yeah, I played it on the PC.
I played on my Xbox 360, which was a nightmare. It kept freezing on me. It kept glitching on me. Serrano got stuck at one point, and I thought it was going to be fine because I didn't necessarily need her. But when I got to her mother's lab, I did actually need her. So I had to reload to my last save, see if she glitched there, get her into the lab. Then the lab glitched, and I couldn't get her to tell me what I needed to do. So I'm running around the lab, just like, what do I do? What do I do? I have these ingredients. What do I do with them? Please help me. It was a nightmare.
Yeah, I didn't glitch much. I played it on Steam on the PC. Although, some bullshit I dealt with is, so I got Skyrim as a gift on the PC because I'd already had it on Xbox. A friend of mine bought it for me. But I never bought the DLC because I already owned all of that on my Xbox. Eventually, I think last year, they came out with like a remastered edition of it that was separate that you had to buy that came with all the DLC. Steam pulled down all of the individual DLC, so you have to look for the URL to buy it specifically. and each DLC is the cost of the whole remastered game.
That's insane.
So it's fuckery, and so I had to just rebuy the game so I could fucking play the DLC, because I was like, well, I could pay $20 for the DLC, or I could just buy the whole game with all of the DLC for the same amount.
Yeah. Every time I encountered one of these glitches, I would just get so upset, and I'd say to my husband, like, if I can't make this work, I'm just going to buy it on the Switch. I need you to tell me that it's okay to spend money on a game that I already own, because I need to just get through this. And then I find out that my mother bought it on the Switch, and then she didn't like it.
Knowing your mother, that's not surprising.
Why?
Patience is not her strong suit. So I think at the end of the day, Skyrim was a fun experiment to engage in the culture of vampirism in this kind of medieval setting. But I wouldn't recommend it if you're looking for a game to look at the culture and lifestyle of being a vampire. It's not as in-depth as I would have liked.
Yeah, Skyrim's a hard game. We talked about it as a possibility for the future of the podcast, but I don't think it's really going to work out for us because, like I said, it doesn't really affect the greater world when you make a choice. Like, it doesn't really matter what choice you make.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. And also, like, the extent of getting married or having kids in that game is you bring your companion. You can marry, to its defense, it's incredibly queer in the fact that you can marry anybody. It doesn't matter what you are. It doesn't matter what they are, what race, what orientation, what gender. It doesn't matter. But the extent of it is you go to a chapel, you give them a ring. I think there's a brief cutscene, and then you're married. Ta-da!
I married Mjol the lioness.
Is she one of the companions?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's a good choice.
She's really cool.
I wanted to marry Serana, but it wouldn't let me.
Yeah.
We were vampires. I want to have vampire babies.
Well, did you have the amulet of Mara?
Me too.
Oh, maybe I didn't have an amulet of Mara.
You didn't have an amulet of Mara. That's how you let people know that you're available.
I forgot.
Because when you're wearing it, people say, how is someone like you single?
I'm sorry, helping her slay her father I thought was a clear enough indication.
I mean...
But I guess not. Before we start to wrap up, is there anything about vampires in video games that we didn't cover that you guys want to mention or tell us about? Games that you've played that you like that you might want to recommend?
I thought Caitlin said
I start Caitlin first.
So I know that you guys bitched about the mechanics, but from a writing perspective, do you feel that the writers at Bethesda had a bias towards some choices compared to others?
No, that is really cool about Skyrim is that, so Skyrim has thousands of books with actual pages that you can read that someone wrote. So they put a lot of care into the writing. I just think that here are all of these options, just pick one. I don't think they were biased to one or the other. One wasn't written better than the other, but I don't think there's enough influence in them either.
I don't think that one was written better than the other, but I think that we can't really say much about it because neither of us chose the taint Oriel's bow option.
Yeah.
Because I could have tainted Oriel's bow with Serana's blood to block out the sun and let vampires reign supreme. Like, you could have done that as non-vampire or vampire, which is really interesting. But neither of us did that, so we can't really know how that outcome was written.
Essentially, we need a third host who's a terrible person to make the bad guy choices, because neither of us will do that.
We just need a resident bad guy.
Yeah, that's true. You had a question as well.
Castlevania Lords of Shadow is deep as fuck.
That's actually true. I've played that as well. I forgot about that. Lords of Shadow was essentially a retelling of the Castlevania story, and Captain Picard's the bad guy, spoiler alert. But, like, it's a really cool game because you start as a vampire hunter, and shit goes down, and it taints the whole narrative until, by the end of the game, you wouldn't recognize your own character, and the second game is completely different from the first game. So that's a good recommendation. If you like God of War style or Devil May Cry or essentially 3D like beat 'em up hack and slash games, it's a really fun game.
Hackathon is something completely different.
Yeah, hack and slash. I would play it on the easiest difficulty though if you just want to see the story because the game cheats. A la Castlevania.
Yes, Caitlin?
Sorry, one more. So my first exposure to Castlevania was Curse of Darkness on
Curse.
PS2.
Curse of Darkness is fun.
I know it gets a lot of flack.
It's a fun game. It's just weird. But that is a good recommendation too.
Yeah, but I've only played a couple of other Castlevania since then, and I'm just sort of thinking
I mean, as someone who's played most of the Castlevania games, I think it's just that people expect a Castlevania game to operate a certain way. Symphony of the Night has become one of the most famous Castlevania games ever made, and it's a side-scrolling Metroidvania. It's part of the namesake of this massive map that you explore. Oh, was it going to hit you?
The elbow. The elbow came up.
And so I think most people expect it to be that, whereas I believe that game was a 3D platformer, and it was one of the first times sort of successfully that series did that. If you liked that game, you should play Lords of Shadow, because it plays similarly, but it's much better. The graphics are better, the controls are better, the voice acting's better. They've got Captain Picard in it. I think that's why it gets a bad rap, is it just was a disappointment comparatively. And the last game before that was Castlevania 64, which was a joke. It was just really bad polygonal vampire game. It was not good. Anyone else?
Any other comments, questions,
concerns?
Video games in general?
Want to talk about video games in general?
Okay.
Oh, back there.
I'm actually really curious. You said that you're more interested in like the indie genre.
Uh-huh.
Sort of. Okay. Are there any? I'm having a hard time finding them. Like gothically oriented indie games that you'd recommend, not just vampire.
Yes, Darkest Dungeon is really cool. I mentioned it earlier. Bloodstained: Curse of the Moon is a prequel to a game coming out later on that's by the original creator of Symphony of the Night, and it's not just vampires. Like the lead character isn't actually Gabrielle, I think her name isn't a human and isn't a vampire. I think she's just some kind of demon or undead creature. Which is really cool because it's a different perspective. But on the Switch and on Steam right now, you can get the prequel, which is designed to look like an 8 or 16-bit Castlevania game. And it's just a lot of fun. Shovel Knight, actually, if you want a more comedic look at Gothic stuff, Shovel Knight's a really great game.
Plague Knight's great.
Plague Knight is really awesome. It's one of the better stories. That has some really cool Gothic stuff in it.
What was that?
Yeah. Spectre Knight, yeah. So Shovel Knight is essentially, if you took Mega Man and DuckTales and some other Nintendo games and put them together, you play a Shovel Knight, a knight who uses a shovel as a weapon, who used to be partnered with Shield Knight, who went missing or disappeared. And you fight these other knights that are all themed based on whatever, the Propeller Knight, Blizzard Knight, I think is one, and one of the knights is Spectre Knight, who essentially looks like Death, has a long scythe, and floats around. They released another campaign later on that's a prequel where you get his story and why he ended up undead, and it is really interesting. And there is, I forgot about that, a lot of Gothic themes in that actually as well. What other indie games? I think that's really it. I would always recommend The Messenger, which isn't really Gothic, but it's very tongue-in-cheek look at the Ninja Gaiden style side-scrolling ninja games that's very tongue-in-cheek and like talks to the screen and breaks the fourth wall a lot. So if you just like indie games, I would recommend that one.
Also, you talk about this stuff a lot on Fun and Games, too.
I do. I have another podcast. I have a lot of them. It's exhausting. But I do a more general video game podcast called Fun and Games with my co-host Jeff Moonen, and we talk about gaming as art, tropes in gaming, trends in the industry. It's more of a general conversation about video games. So if you're more curious, not about Mass Effect, but about gaming in general, I would recommend that as a listen to.
Okay. That's about everything. I think it's time to wrap it up.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for being here, first of all.
Yeah, thank you for joining us on this detour through a very different land.
And listening to us yap at you about a game that we sort of liked. I don't know. The jury's still out on Skyrim at this point. I loved it when I first played it, but now
it has a
I'm
very
tired.
special place in my heart.
It is. And it's a good game. It's a great game. I'm just tired and old, I think.
Get it on the Switch if you want to play it now.
Yes. I would recommend that highly.
So if you like what you heard here, follow us on social media. You can find us at Reignite Pod on Twitter, Tumblr, and Instagram, facebook.com/reignitepod, or send us an email at reignitepod@gmail.com.
You can rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcatcher. It helps us get more visible and featured on whatever app you use. Facebook also is a good place to rate and review us as well.
We're members of the Certain Point of View Network. Visit certainpov.com to find more nerdy podcasts, each with a unique point of view.
Yeah, Star Wars podcast, Superman podcast. There's several movie podcasts. My other video game podcast we just mentioned is on there. Our new show that's in development is a podcast about cereal and cartoons, like rating cereals and cartoons. So, you have that to look forward to. I'd also like to thank Christina Spinks for our latest t-shirt on Redbubble. I made a joke that Kaden Alenko in Mass Effect is like a marshmallow. He's soft and gentle. And so now it is a t-shirt that is really adorable that was drawn by our friend. Also David Boyle, who designed our logo, which is on the stickers. Please come take a free sticker. Put them places or on you if you want. That's fine too. Who designed our logo. David, thank you so much. And also our theme, although maybe not for this episode, but our general theme, we use a song called Mass Effect Rap by Dan Bull, who is a British nerd rapper who raps about video games constantly. He has 9 different video game themed rap albums, plus he does regular kind of indie rap as well. Definitely check him out. Thank you, Dan Bull, for the use of your theme. Or our theme, your song, forget it.
Wow. And last but certainly not least, thank you to Dark Side of the Con for having us here. I'm MJ.
And I'm Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
And this was Reignite.
Some may call this junk. Me, I call them treasures.
Thank you guys so much for being here. Come get stickers.
Mass Effect.
I'm Commander Shepard, the man with the method to brandish a weapon and an handle to get with it. I'm an effortless hero. My rhymes shine brighter than Element Zero, bringing more fire than Emperor Nero. It's the end of an era. Yo, there's something mysterious with Siren Arterius committing violence against Nihilus. I'm furious. I'm chasing from place to place, base to base, until we're face to face. I'm serious. From the serious relay to Artemis Tau, I'll tighten the net. I'm not far from it now. I'll fight all the get till a bastard is found. I'll leave his heart in the ground. I'm the Southpaw outlaw scoundrel, bringing down more tools than a whole ground force. Listen out now, fool, it's pretty damn doubtful that I'll be sitting down with the Citadel Council. The Reapers are keen to bring about your downfall, so me and my team are about to flout laws. I'll introduce you to the whole of my party. Garrus, Liara, Tazzoni and Tali, Rex, Kaiden, Ashley, Joker, the army. You roll with an Asari, older than Atari, a Kroger that'll leave you cold within a heartbeat. My team's hotter than a stolen Ferrari. Can a Volus go shoulder to shoulder with me hardly? My ship's seeing off more foes than a Somalis. So we're going on safari to the far reaches, it'll be gnarly. Seeing stranger creations than Dali, and breaking more faces than Arnie.
Mass Effect 2.
Blown to pieces and reassemble. I don't believe this, it's bleeding mental. But then again, with these credentials, can they be blamed for believing me essential? I don't wanna be nervously lunching with Cerberus. I prefer to be punching a journalist, souping up all my guns for the skirmishes in which I'll puncture the firmament. Permanent, I'm gonna lyrical Mass Effect. My skill to kill a million billion massive get. Commander Shepard's formidable syllables hitting the predicament is a miracle that commands mass respect. Incontestable, I'm a professional, but my new boss is less than respectable. So you better cover at your testicles, cause my next method's a bit of a spectacle. More fresh and raw than a vegetable, coming from the underground with the hunger of a thresher more. I leave the rack 9 with the black eye, slap pie jacks with the backhand, never act nice. Rap line sharper than a cacti, or the bite of a baron on a barren planet baptized in flame. Rise again, in fact I'm insane, providing pain. Back from the afterlife, packing an appetite to invade. This in a driving range, but I'll leave you with 18 holes inside of your brain, like a Swiss cheese. Bitch please, you'll disbelieve the manner in which I kick freeze. Bringing sci-fi to your hi-fi is the highlight of your lifetime with ease.